3 lessons from Buddha on ego and true happiness. We talked about the reasons why it's important to develop a skillful sense of self on the path. Today we'll talk about the Buddha's instructions in how to do it, and the lessons we learn from doing it well, a healthy sense of self. The self-strategy that the Buddha recommends using along the path derives from the question, at the basis of discernment, what, when I do it, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness. This question contains 2 ideas of self. The first is the idea of the self as agent, the producer of happiness. The second is the idea of the self as the consumer of happiness. When the question says, what, when I do it, the I here in I do it, is the self as producer, the my in my long-term welfare, and happiness is the self as consumer of happiness. The idea of the self as agent also introduces the element of control, which the Buddha says is essential to any idea of self. This was the point he made at the very beginning of his first discussion of not self. If you have no real control over something, how can you say that it's you or yours? It's only through the relative element of control you have over some of the aggregates that you can identify with them to begin with. Now the Buddha has us use both the idea of self as producer and the idea of self as consumer as part of our motivation for practice. For example, concerning the self as producer, there's a passage where Ananda tells a nun that even though we practice to put an end to conceit, it's only through a certain kind of conceit that we can actually practice. The conceit he's referring to is the conceit implicit in the idea, if others can do this, so can I. This relates to our confidence as producers of action that we are competent to learn how to do things correctly and skillfully. This healthy sense of I gives us confidence that we can handle the path. Without it, we wouldn't be able to attempt the path at all. The Buddha also teaches us to use the idea of self as consumer as motivation for the path. There's a passage in the canon where has apparently talking about a monk was getting discouraged on the path and is thinking about going back to his lay life. Essentially, he recommends that a monk in that situation ask himself, do you really love yourself? Are you going to content yourself simply with the food, clothing, shelter, and medicine of lay life, even though this means staying in the cycle of birth, aging, illness, and death? Or would you really like to put an end to suffering? The implication here is that if you really love yourself, you should try to put an end to suffering. You should care for the self that's going to be consuming the results of your actions. So what should the self as producer do to show genuine goodwill for the self as consumer? The traditional answers for the Buddha's question, what, when I do it, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness, fall into 2 classes. The first class gives specific and don'ts. The second class gives advice on how to determine for yourself what's the most skillful thing to do in a given situation. In the first class, there are the practices called acts of merit, generosity, virtue, and the development of goodwill. Each of these practices fosters a healthy sense of self. When the Buddha teaches generosity, he emphasizes the fact that you're free to give. In fact, when a king once asked him, who should I give things to? The king expected that the Buddha would say, give to me and my disciples. Instead, the Buddha said, give wherever you feel inspired. In other words, he encouraged the king to practice generosity as a way of exercising his freedom to choose. The act of generosity is one of the first ways we realize that we do have freedom of choice. When you were a child, the first time you realized you had that freedom was when you gave away something you didn't need to give. It wasn't on a holiday or somebody's birthday where you had to give something. It was when of your own accord you wanted to make a gift of something that was yours. A strong sense of well-being and self-worth came from that choice. When you're forced to give, there's no special sense of self-worth. But if you give, when there's no compulsion, it gives rise to a sense of self-esteem. You're not just a slave to your appetites. You have the noble heart that's willing to share pleasure with others. Similarly, with the practice of virtue, such as observing the 5 precepts or avoiding the 10 courses of unskillful action, when you realize that there are ways that you could get away with harming someone, but you choose not to, it gives rise to a very strong sense of self-worth. When you're tempted to do something that's unskillful, but you learn how to say no to that temptation, you realize again that you're not a slave to your defilements. This is how the practice of virtue develops. Skill in learning to deal with addictive behavior, for example. Suppose that you feel tempted to do something and you try to say no. Part of the mind will say, well, you're going to say yes in 5 minutes, so why not say yes now? You learn how to say, no, I'm not going to fall for that trick. What I do in 5 minutes is not my responsibility right now. My responsibility is what I do right now. If you keep this up, you learn how to deal with all the tricks that the mind has to fool itself. This gives rise to a sense of competence and self-worth. It also gives you a lesson in the existence of choice, which is an important element on the path. Meditation on goodwill also gives rise to a sense of great well-being and self-worth. On the one hand, it reminds you that you do deserve to find true happiness. I don't know about France, but in America many people say that they have trouble feeling goodwill for themselves. They don't feel worthy of true happiness. If you have that attitude, it saps the strength you need to follow the path. But if you can remind yourself that true happiness isn't selfish or self-indulgent, it doesn't harm anyone, and it also puts you in a better position to help other people. This gives you a healthy motivation to practice. On the other hand, the ability to extend thoughts of goodwill to large numbers of people, even those you don't like, creates a spacious sense of your own nobility, the nobility that comes from not carrying grudges or playing favorites. All of these ways of practice give training in being more skillful and more mature in how you create your sense of I and mine. At the same time, they give you practice in learning how to disidentify with less skillful intentions, such the desire to be stingy, hurtful, or mean. In this way, you're gaining practice in developing the perceptions of self and not self in a skillful way. Now, the Buddha realized that simply giving instructions in generosity, virtue, and meditation would not cover every situation. In life, it's important that you also learn the skills to judge for yourself what is skillful in the areas where clear-cut rules don't apply, or two good general principles would pull you in opposite directions. So he also gave instructions on how to train yourself to judge situations wisely for yourself. He'll give an illustration of this principle. If you ever go to Alaska, you'll discover that there are bears. Most of the people who encounter bears in Alaska have no previous experience with bears. They don't understand bears' habits or the etiquette of bears. Bears do have their etiquette, so in order to train strangers in how to deal with bears, the Alaskan government used to post big signs around the state entitled Bear Awareness. It's joke in English that doesn't work in French, because the word bear in bear awareness can also be bear. The signs listed 10 points to remember. When encountering bears, I can't remember all 10, but the first 9 gave specific do's and don'ts. For example, if you see a bear, do not run away. Even if the bear runs at you, do not run off. Instead, raise your hands so that you look large to the bear. Bears have very poor eyesight, and stand your ground. At the same time, speak to the bear in a calm, reassuring voice to let the bear know that you mean it no harm. If the bear attacks you, lie down and play dead. Usually the bear will lose interest and walk away. That was as far as the specific instructions took you. Then the sign told you that there's a situation where it couldn't tell you what to do, which is if the bear starts to chew on you, because the bear may have 2 different intentions. 1, it simply may be curious to see if you really are dead. The other is if the bear is hungry. So while you're lying there with the bear nibbling on you, you have to decide which is the bear's motivation. If the bear is simply nibbling out of curiosity, continue to play dead. The bear will lose interest and walk away. However, if the bear is hungry, fight for all of your life. Poke your finger in its eyes and do whatever else you can think of to scare it away. Now, to decide the bear's motivation in a situation like that requires a lot of mindfulness and alertness. The first thing the Buddha taught to his son: in the same way as you're facing your day-to-day life, there will be areas where the Buddha's instructions on generosity, virtue, and goodwill give clear guidance, and areas where they don't. In areas where they don't, you have to develop your own mindfulness, alertness, and many other skillful qualities to determine the right thing to do. This principle is so important that it was the first thing the Buddha taught to his son. What do you think, Rahula? What is a mirror for? For reflection, sir. In the same way, Rahula, bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions are to be done with repeated reflection. Whenever you want to perform a bodily action, you should reflect on it. This bodily action I want to perform, would it lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Is it an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results? If on reflection you know that it would lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, it would be an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results, then any bodily action of that sort is absolutely unfit for you to do. But if on reflection you know that it would not cause affliction, it would be a skillful bodily action with happy consequences, happy results, then any bodily act of that sort is fit for you to do. While you are performing a bodily action, you should reflect on it. This bodily action I am doing, is it leading to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Is it an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results? If on reflection you know that it is leading to self-affliction, to affliction of others, or both, you should give it up. But if on reflection you know that it is not, you may continue with it. Having performed a bodily action, you should reflect on it. If on reflection you know that it led to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, it was an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results, then you should confess it, reveal it, lay it open to the teacher or to a knowledgeable companion in the holy life. Having confessed it, you should exercise restraint in the future. But if on reflection you know that it did not lead to affliction, it was a skillful bodily action with happy consequences, happy results, then you should stay mentally refreshed, joyful, training day-night in skillful mental qualities. Similarly with verbal and mental actions, except for the last paragraph under mental actions. Having performed a mental action, you should reflect on it. If, on reflection, you know that it led to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, it was an unskillful mental action with painful consequences, painful results, then you should feel distressed, ashamed, disgusted with it. Feeling distressed, you should exercise restraint in the future. But if on reflection you know that it did not lead to affliction, it was a skillful mental action with happy consequences, happy results, then you should stay mentally refreshed, joyful, training day-night in skillful mental qualities. Rahula, all those contemplatives, Brahmins, in the course of the past who purified their bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions, did it through repeated reflection on their bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions in just this way. All those contemplatives, Brahmins, in the course of the future who will purify their bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions, will do it through repeated reflection on their bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions in just this way. All those contemplatives, Brahmins, at present who purify their bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions, do it through repeated reflection on their bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions in just this way. Thus, Rahula, you should train yourself. I will purify my bodily actions through repeated reflection. I will purify my verbal actions through repeated reflection. I will purify my mental actions through repeated reflection. That's how you should train yourself. Min 61, Majjhima Nikaya 61. Ambalathika Rahulavada Sutta, Instructions to Rahula. Notice the qualities of heart and mind that are developed by this kind of practice. First, it teaches you to be observant, and in particular to be observant of your own actions, their motivation and their results, because this is one area where we tend to engage in a lot of denial. The area of our motivations, our actions, and their results is the first area where we learn denial when we're children, as when we might have said it was already broken when I lay down on it. The Buddha here is teaching you not to develop that attitude. If you actually broke it by stepping on it, you should admit that you were the one who broke it. The Buddha's instructions here also teach you to have a healthy attitude toward your mistakes, what we would call a healthy sense of shame, one that comes with a high sense of self-esteem. You're not ashamed of yourself as a person, but you are ashamed of any of your actions that have caused harm because you regard them as beneath you. This healthy shame is actually very helpful on the path because it enables you to see your mistakes as mistakes, and it makes you want to stop making them. First steps in being able to learn from them. The Buddha's instructions also teach other healthy attitudes, for example, compassion. You want to make sure that your actions harm no one. Truthfulness. If you make a mistake, you should be willing to admit it to other people. Integrity. Take responsibility for your actions. In particular, however, the Buddha's instructions here teach the most skillful sense of self to help you on the path, a self that's always willing to learn. If your sense of pride or self-worth is built on the idea that you're already good, you'll have trouble learning and trouble admitting mistakes. But if your pride or self-worth is built on the idea that you're always willing to learn, then it opens many possibilities for developing more skill. It's the best kind of pride there is, the most useful basis for skillful making and my-making. This is the kind of pride that can use a sense of shame, integrity, and all the other attitudes the Buddha is teaching here as means to negotiate with your less skillful selves, the less skillful members of the committee, and win them over to the path to true happiness. In the factors of the path, this comes under right effort, the ability to generate desire within yourself to do the right thing. Finally, these instructions teach an important lesson about happiness, that it is possible to find a happiness that also offers happiness to others. In other words, your happiness does not have to depend on the pain of others. If it's gained through generosity, virtue, and goodwill, it actually fosters their happiness too. In this way, you learn not to draw a sharp line between your happiness and the happiness of those around you, and as a result you focus less on the word my in my happiness and take more interest in trying to master cause and effect, what actions actually cause happiness both for yourself and for those around you. In this way, the sense of self fades into the background and your sensitivity to cause and effect comes more to the fore. This is what enables you to get more and more skillful on the path, so that when bears attack you, you'll be able to tell whether they're eating you out of curiosity or out of hunger, and that way you can deal skillfully with any situation you encounter on the path. There are 3 ways to approach the Dhamma. One is by acquiring knowledge through study of the Buddha's discourses, trying to remember them as faithfully as possible. That is very useful for the propagation of the teaching through lectures and books. Another way is through devotion, offering flowers and incense, reciting devotional verses, giving gifts and making merit. Generosity and meritorious action were highly recommended by the Buddha, but he didn't put any value on just being in the presence of monks and nuns. Once there was a monk who was so enraptured with the Buddha that he never wanted to be out of his sight. When this monk became sick one day and was unable to see the Buddha, he became despondent. The other monks asked him why he was so unhappy. He explained that he was depressed because he could not see the Buddha, who then came to visit the sick monk and said to him, "What do you see in this vile form? There is nothing to see in that. Whoever sees me sees the Dhamma. Whoever sees Dhamma sees me." The third approach to Dhamma, namely practice, has always been the one most highly recommended by the Buddha. He said a person with real reverence and devotion is one who lives according to the teaching. There are a number of steps to be taken when we approach the Dhamma through practice. The foundation would be moral conduct, meritorious actions, making good karma. Without such a foundation, we do not have enough security within to be peaceful and at ease with ourselves, which are prerequisites for meditation. This has sometimes been misinterpreted to mean that we should not meditate unless we have already complete purity of precepts and gain perfect mindfulness. But that doesn't follow, because it's meditation that helps us to gain mindfulness and gives us insight into the efficacy of the precepts. The next practice aspect is to guard our senses. This is frequently mentioned by the Buddha, so that it bears repeating and remembering. Without guarding our senses, we are always open to being tempted into wanting and craving, resulting in turmoil in the mind. Our sense contacts are triggers for lust and hate. Our senses are so permanently engaged that we have lost sight of their impact, are taking all that for granted and think that's just the way it is. We also believe that what we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, and think is really exactly as we are interpreting it. That's a fundamental error everyone experiences their sense contacts in an individual manner. Here is an example. The food Westerners eat is considered baby food in Asia. Food spiced in the Asian way appears like hellfire to the Western palate. Even such a basic necessity as food shows up as a completely opposite experience. We can infer from that we all live in our own world. People argue vehemently because they believe their world must be the right one, and even kill each other because of unresolved differences. The Buddha was often asked such a question as, is the world finite or infinite? Eternal or not, his answer was, what is the world? The world is our sense contacts. When asked questions such as these, the Buddha always brought the questioner back to practice. When we know that the world we live in consists of our sense contacts, we have something to practice with. When we know that the world is eternal or not, what is there to practice with? Our senses include thinking, which is an almost constantly operating faculty. At this moment we have touch, sound, sight, and thought contact. 4 of our 6 senses are engaged. Because our senses have been at work all our lives, we believe that is the only way life can be experienced, which creates our deep craving to continue in this form. There is danger in this craving, something most people are not aware of consciously. Subconsciously, we all know about it because that's where our fears originate. If we examine ourselves for a moment, we will realize that we harbor many fears, all carrying different names. Some people are afraid of spiders or snakes. Some are afraid of the dark. Some are afraid of airplanes. Others that their loved ones may die, or that they might lose all their money. All sorts of different names for exactly the same fear. The fear of losing one's identifications. The fear of unpleasant, painful sense contacts. Ultimately, the fear of annihilation, yet losing. This existence is a guaranteed outcome of being alive. It's just a matter of time. These fears are caused by our attachment to our pleasant sense contacts, identifying with them and believing that apart from our senses, there is no other reality. Naturally, we want that to continue then. We take our unpleasant experiences in stride, expecting them to cease, and the pleasant ones to arise again. If our unpleasant sense contacts are in the majority, then we say we are having a lot of dukkha, or we might say, I'm having a problem. As a matter of fact, we are all having the same problem, namely that of not being enlightened. When we come to the realization that our sense contacts are very momentary and their inherent satisfaction a matter of opinion, we will find it easier to let go of them during meditation. Meditation will only happen when the sense contacts, particularly the thinking, are suspended. If, for instance, the touch contact in the sitting position is recognized and attended to as unpleasant, the mind starts working on that. Remembering what someone said yesterday, last week, or even 10 years ago can start the mind churning. This is all due to our attachment to our senses and our identification with them. From all sense contacts, feelings arise. There is no way they can be altered, but we can stop ourselves from reacting to such feelings and believing that they belong to us. To get our meditation to a concentrated state, we must refuse to react to feelings arisen from sense contacts. The more we practice this in daily life, the easier it will be to become concentrated. In meditation, we don't have to go along with this natural reaction of human beings. Meditative absorptions are supermundane, and therefore require supermundane qualities in us. Whenever the Buddha described the way to Nibbana, he included the meditative absorptions as part of the practice to lead us to the inner realization of the Dhamma. Guarding our senses is not only important in meditation, but equally valid in daily life. In a meditation course, where there isn't as much input as in ordinary situation, it is a little easier to protect our minds from liking or disliking what we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, and think. In order to facilitate this, we need to practice hearing only sounds without explaining to ourselves what it is we heard. When the mind starts telling its story about the sound, at least, we will know what we are doing, namely investing sound with a reality which gives it importance. The same applies to eye contact. If, for instance, we are looking at a bush, our mind will say, "Oh, a cinnamon bush, who planted it? I wonder if we can use it." Or any number of other ideas. Instead of all this, we can look at that which we call bush and be aware that our eyes are touching upon a form, and thereby stopping the mind from making up stories. If we can manage to do this once or twice outside of meditation, we can use the same method of handling sense input in meditation. When we guard ourselves against the mind-made details of sense contacts, we are in less danger of falling into greed and hate. We will find this a great help in becoming concentrated in meditation. Our lives are governed by our senses, but we do not have to continue with that. It is not compulsory. Within the operation of our six senses, it is not possible to find continued and unadulterated happiness. If it were possible, we would already be blissfully contented since we have been having sense input day after day, life after life. The answer does not lie in improving our sense contacts, even though most people do try that, but rather in improving our reactions so that eventually equanimity becomes our mode of living. This is the promise the Buddha made to us, namely that we can get out of all dukkha, all problems, but not by having only wonderful sense contacts and not a single moment of unpleasantness. Such a thing has never been possible, not even when the Buddha himself was alive. But we can have moments when we are actually able to do just that. That one moment gives us the initial experience what it is like to be free, which is the only kind of freedom to be found in human life. There is no other anyone who understands the Buddha's explicit instructions, especially those who meditate can practice in this manner. The next step to be taken is mindfulness, accompanied by clear comprehension sampajanya. Mindfulness is the mental factor of just knowing, clear comprehension the one of understanding. We need both. That too can and should be practiced in daily life. Mindfulness of the body was praised by the Buddha as leading to the deathless, a synonym for nibbana. When we watch our body's actions and realize that it can only follow the mind's instructions, this is our first step into insight. Usually we take mind and body for granted. Most people are more interested in their body than in their mind and are looking after the body very well. Very few people are looking after their mind. Being aware of our body's movements gives us a chance to be alert without thinking, just knowing. Clear comprehension is our four-pronged mode of discrimination described previously. We might think that such discrimination would slow us down unduly, that we won't be able to get our work done. Actually, it has the opposite effect, because we will not do anything that is unnecessary when we use mindfulness and clear comprehension again and again. They will become a habit, which will enhance our abilities to attain calm and insight. When we experience our mind ordering our body around, this is different from just knowing about it. We become intimately acquainted with our dual aspect of mind and body and can begin to investigate where is me in that. We may eventually find that me is our wish to be eternal, not to be annihilated. Most people would like to experience calm, bliss, and tranquility in meditation. But those whose minds are very active need to gain insight first in order to become calm. Those whose minds are more peaceful in any case find it easier to become calm first and gain insight later. A little calm creates a little insight, and vice versa. In practice, we work on both these aspects to give ourselves the best chance to develop both simultaneously. When we watch the breath going in and out of the nostrils, we try to achieve a calm and peaceful mind. When the mind strays to thinking, we first realize my thinking, and then see the impermanent nature of each thought, and how it so often rolls along, without any purpose. This is a valuable insight, because we can infer that our thoughts are frequently not to be believed, are unimportant, have no solidity, and do not provide a secure foothold for us. Without such an experience, we might continue to believe all our thoughts, and try using them as solid foundations for our life. But when we see in meditation that we can't remember what we were thinking from one second to the next, that belief is shattered, never to arise again. When we start doubting our thoughts, that doesn't mean we start doubting ourselves. It refers to doubting our views and opinions, which is a most valuable practice. In the discourse on living kindness, Karaniya Metta Sutta, an arahant is described as being totally free from all views. What the Buddha expounded to us were his own experiences. Viewpoints are always based on our wrong assumption that there is a me, and are therefore discolored by this underlying error. When we realize what our minds are up to, we will eventually stop having so many viewpoints and thereby let go of some of the mind's clutter. Most minds are full of ideas, hopes, plans, memories, and opinions. Right and wrong are often based on culture or tradition and have no ultimate validity. They clutter up the mind and leave no space for a totally new outlook upon ourselves and the world. An important step in this sequence is self-conquest, which the Buddha described as the way to nibbana. As long as we react to our feelings created through sense contacts, we must admit that we are reactors rather than actors, victims rather than masters. We like to think of ourselves as more exalted than that, yet when we observe reality, that is all we can find. As soon as we have overcome this habitual reacting, we have taken a step towards conquering ourselves. We do not force ourselves into unpleasant situations, which we haven't learned to cope with yet, because the mind will again react negatively, which doesn't help us on the path. We need not sit in excruciating pain in meditation, but we need to observe our mind and its activity. This will assist us also in daily living when unpleasant feelings and dislike arise because of words we hear or sights we see. When we learn to accept things the way they are, self-conquest has taken place, which releases us from views and opinions. Dukkha arises from the fact that we don't like the law of nature to which we are subject. We don't like our loved ones dying. We don't like physical pain or lack of appreciation. We don't like losing what we prize. If we could just accept the way it is, it would go a long way towards looking at the world more realistically, with less passion, which is the way to freedom. Our passionate desires keep us in bounds. When we have the opportunity to sit quietly and watch ourselves, new insights about ourselves may arise. We are the prototype of impermanence. But when our mind veers toward the past and starts rehashing old movies, it's time to turn it off. The past cannot be changed. The person who experienced the past no longer exists, is only a fantasy now. When the mind strolls to the future, imagining how we would like it to be, we can let go by remembering the future has no reality either. When it happens, it can only be the present and the person planning. The future is not the same one who will experience it. If we stay in this moment, here and now, during meditation, we can use that same skill in daily life when we handle each moment with mindfulness and clear comprehension. Everything functions well, nothing goes amiss. Our mind is content and inner peace can arise. Keeping our attention focused on each step on the way will eventually bring us to the summit. 4 pathways to true power. Are you ready to level up? The 4 pathways to power are, according to the Buddha, essential aspects of realizing liberation. He said, if a monk or nun has missed the 4 pathways to power, they have missed the way to liberation. If they have practiced the 4 pathways to power, they are practicing the right way. These 4 pathways are initially mundane, which means they are an endeavor which all of us are capable of pursuing. Only when they have become powers are they supermundane and constitute 4 of the 37 factors of enlightenment. Because they are so essential to practice and cannot be disregarded, we need to know about them in detail. We have to understand them in an analytical way so that we can check up on our own results. This is the criterion that eventually turns knowledge into wisdom. We can learn any of the Buddha's teachings by heart. That's not so difficult. But consequently, we need to look at these teachings in the light of personal endeavor. We can check whether our practice has borne fruit or not. If so, we will continue in the same way as before. If not, we need to alter our approach by investigating within whether we are actually doing what the Buddha taught and whether it has become part of our own inner being. We gain insight into our mind's capacity. When we see that through practice we have been able to enlarge the abilities of our mind, we will not become complacent but resolve to increase them further. The 4 pathways to power start out with Chanda Samadhi. Chanda is intention and can be wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral. It also means desire or direction. In order to make it a pathway to power, we have to use it as the intention towards complete insight. Samadhi, as part of the term, means that the intention has to be fully concentrated and not dissipated. This would be the difference between living a worldly life or living a life wholly dedicated to spiritual endeavor. In a worldly life, we are forced to dissipate our intentions into different directions. It is the nature of life in the world, the necessity for obtaining and looking after many different objects. Even though we can minimize that, will take up some time. There are always people and material aspects who have a claim on us. We have to honor those claims. Our own ambition and desires are being fostered in the world as being useful and commendable in order to cultivate concentration of intention. Leading to total liberation, we need to be in circumstances where no obstacles arise. All 4 of the pathways have willpower as an adjunct. Concentration of intention also includes unappointedness. It only becomes a true pathway when our intention is directed towards the greatest power of all, namely the power arising from letting go of all craving. The second pathway is concentration of energy, viriyosamati. Everyone has a certain amount of physical energy, which sometimes becomes detrimental to our mental endeavor when there is too much restlessness. If we have too little physical energy, that is also counterproductive. But mental energy can be increased, namely by being unappointed, using our energy in one direction only, not having many irons in the fire. We need to be clear about what is of the utmost importance for us in this life. This needs checking up in the quiet introspection of our own contemplation. What is it that I want most? Where do I want to expend my energy? What is my main intention? The answer may not be to come to the end of dukkha. That is all right too. But we can benefit by concentrating our energy and intention no matter where we are heading, as it will protect us from wasting our time with useless actions. The willpower we can arouse depends very much on our insight. If we have seen the urgency of our own spiritual growth, we will find it easier to have the will for practice. All of us are subject to instinctual actions and reactions based on desire and craving. Willpower helps us to let go of these and direct our energy into different channels. Urgency samvega is an essential part of successful practice. When our insights give rise to seeing the whole world on fire from craving and ourselves burning with it, then urgency will become a natural part of our makeup and willpower a concomitant to it. Willpower arises in direct proportion to urgency, which is connected to our insight into the world around us. The world which does not stop at our front door, because it lives in our own heart and mind. The next pathway to power is concentration of consciousness. Chittasamadhi, or own-appointedness of concentration. When intention and energy come together in a powerful way coupled with willpower, meditative concentration can result. The first two pathways are causes for the third one to arise, leading to meditative absorptions. Deep tranquility in one's meditation is the underlying factor needed for profound insights, which can change an ordinary worldling to a noble one, which is the goal of our practice. Most people today are not really aware of that, but are interested in meditation to gain release from stress. That too is all right. Why not? The Buddha's purpose and teaching were relief and release from dukkha once and for all, so that it can never arise again. If we translate dukkha as stress, which we can well do, then we might say, yes, it is relief from stress, but the kind of release the Buddha had in mind is based on the depth of insight, where we realize and experience that isn't really dukkha that disappears, but the me who is experiencing it vanishes. Only-pointed intention and only-pointed effort lead to only-pointed consciousness. The mind finds itself in a state of awareness, where there are no obstructions or obstacles resulting from thinking. Insight does not arise from thoughts, but is an inner, intuitive knowing, quite different from discursive and logical thinking, rather an outcome of a clear and calm mind. This leads the awareness into the depths of truth, which has always been there, but which did not rise to the surface before, so that the mind could not grasp it previously. What the Buddha experienced under the Bodhi tree, when he was able to formulate the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, was not a result of discursive thinking, nor of logical or learned understanding. It was a deep inner experience which arose from a totally calm mind without obstructions. It is our saving grace that a mind can do only one thing at a time. When we are calm and concentrated, all our hindrances are momentarily laid to rest. This is the boon of meditation. When there are no obstacles in the mind, it has the ability to recognize an entirely different depth than it does under ordinary circumstances, when we are always in danger of having greed, hate, or deluded mind states arise. When we arouse the pathways to power, we create a different dimension in the mind. This is essential, as otherwise we may believe in the Buddha and his teaching, but may not be able to prove it ourselves. It is up to all of us to live the Dhamma in heart and mind. The fourth pathway is the concentration of investigation. Subsequent to the experience of calm and tranquility with their inherent expansion of consciousness, comes investigation for insight. The meditative calm becomes a condition for insight through concentrated investigation. When we realize the impermanence of even the best meditative states, None of the pathways, however, only apply to meditation. While they benefit us greatly in the context of meditation, they are useful and practicable in all other moments of our lives. We certainly need concentrated intention in daily living. We cannot one day intend to be kind, the next day selfish, then kind again, and expect to be peaceful and happy. We also need to know what we are aiming for in mundane living. If we want a university education, we have to concentrate on that intention. We cannot go to university one day, stay home the next day, and expect to pass examinations. Concentration of energy is also a basic requirement of daily living. If we conserve our energy to use it where it bears the best fruit, our mundane endeavors will flourish and be easily accomplished if we develop and cultivate right intention. Energy, willpower, and concentration. We can increase our potential manifold, notwithstanding any results we may see and done. Ourselves, we should never expect to be either totally perfect or totally imperfect. We need to look upon ourselves as practitioners, those who are learning. In the Buddha's time, they were called savaka, which means hearer. If we consider ourselves in that way, we need not search for perfection or imperfection, but rather try to draw nearer to giving up all ideas of me and mine. Concentrated investigation of phenomena is an aspect of our moment-to-moment mindfulness, which enables us to see anicca, impermanence, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, or anatta, corelessness, wherever we look. Everything that exits proclaims these three characteristics, so that we need never be without Dhamma consciousness. Usually one of the three aspects becomes more pregnant with meaning for us, and our mind veers in that direction to investigate the underlying truth behind the reality in which we live. We are never without an object for investigation. Our thoughts and feelings are full of these three characteristics. When there is a pleasant feeling, can we keep it? Do we feel unhappy when it is gone? Are we beginning to see this whole person we are so concerned with as nothing but flux and flow, with no solid core to be found anywhere? When we look at ourselves again and again, we will eventually realize that we cannot find an unchanging substance within. Depth of insight arises through the meditative process. However, we need to assist our practice by investigative thoughts and directions in daily living. If our mind is concerned with worldly affairs or sensual pleasures during the day, it is asking too much of it to become calm and insightful in the evening. It is an unrealistic expectation which no mind can fulfill. We need to prepare our mind so that it is used to thinking in terms of Dhamma consciousness, with mindfulness already established as a daily habit. Then we can proceed with meditation without first having to shed all mental burdens. We are already facing in the right direction and can easily achieve calm and peacefulness, which are our resource for mental energy. When we are young, we may be inclined to think that our body is our source of energy, but the body can fall sick at any time, can be maimed, or even die. Our real energy source lies in the fact that the mind can renew itself and become powerful through the arising of deep tranquility. Then it doesn't matter whether the body is old and decrepit or young and healthy, because mind is the master and body the servant. We need the meditative calm as our fuel supply. It is more important even than food, although one does eventually have to have food again. One can go without it for quite a long time, much longer than usually thought possible, and still have much energy to meditate. We have this natural resource within, yet very few people take advantage of it. In order to make use of it, the mind needs protection during daily living, so that it is already in the right frame of consciousness when meditation begins. Insight into the futility of ambitions and desires helps to lessen discursive and distracting thinking. The four pathways to power are mundane when we are practicing, and become supermundane when we have perfected them. They bring total liberation from dukkha if culmination of intention, energy, willpower, calm, and insight is achieved, which they demand of us.